The American dream is a lie that costs $400,000 and 30 years of your life. We have been told since the day we were born that a house is the ultimate investment, the bedrock of the middle class, and the only safe way to build wealth. But the math says we are being robbed in broad daylight. Over the last century, the stock market has outperformed real estate by a factor of 5 to 1. It is not even a fair fight. If you had put $100,000 into the stock market 30 years ago, you would be sitting on nearly $2 million today. If you put that same money into a house, you would have barely $300,000 in raw appreciation. Stocks don't just win, they destroy real estate in every historical data set we have. And yet, there is a massive, uncomfortable paradox that nobody wants to explain to you. Despite the math being clearly on the side of the stock market, the average homeowner in this country has a net worth that is 38 times higher than the average renter. Read that again. 5 times worse asset, 38 times richer owners. That logic is broken. It shouldn't work, it doesn't make sense, and your realtor certainly isn't going to be the one to explain why. My name is Nick, and today we are going to stop the emotional arguments and start looking at the actual numbers. We are breaking down exactly why almost everyone gets the house versus stocks question wrong, the hidden math that determines which one will actually make you a millionaire, and the one behavioral factor that matters more than the asset you pick. Before you sign another lease or look at another open house, you need to see this math. Let's start with the number that defines the entire financial world. Over the last 100 years, the S&P 500 has returned an average of about 10% per year. When you adjust that for inflation, you are looking at a real return of around 7%. Now look at U.S. home prices. Over that same 100-year period, the Case-Shiller Index shows that housing has returned about 4% nominally, but after inflation, the real return on a house is less than 1%. In some decades, it is actually zero. This means that a house, at its core, is just a very expensive way to keep up with the price of milk. If you treat a house like a savings account, it is one of the worst performing accounts in human history. If you take $100,000 and park it in a house for 30 years, you end up with $324,000. If you park it in a low-cost index fund, you end up with $1.7 million. That is a difference of nearly $1.5 million just for choosing a different button to click. On paper, buying a house is a catastrophic financial mistake. So we should all be selling our homes and living in trailers while we pump our cash into the market, right? Wrong. And this is the moment where the real estate industry pulls out its secret weapon. It is called leverage. When you buy $100,000 worth of an index fund, you have to bring $100,000 to the table. But when you buy a $500,000 house, the bank lets you play with their money. You put down 20%, which is $100,000, and the bank gives you the other $400,000. Suddenly, you are controlling an asset that is 5 times larger than your actual cash. Every single dollar that the house goes up in value belongs to you, not the bank. This is the math that breaks people's brains. If a $500,000 house goes up by just 3% in a year, that is $15,000 in appreciation. But you didn't invest $500,000. You invested $80,000 or $100,000. That $15,000 gain represents a 15% return on your actual cash. When you add in the fact that you are paying down the principal of the loan every month, your actual cash-on-cash return can hit 25 or 30% in a good year. This is the cheat code of the middle class. Mathematically, when leverage is working in your favor, nothing on earth can touch the wealth-building power of a primary residence. It is the only time in your life the bank will hand a regular person $500,000 to gamble on an asset. But leverage is a double-edged sword, and in finance, the edge that cuts you is usually the one you aren't looking at. Leverage is a switch, and when that switch flips the wrong way, it doesn't just hurt, it ruins you. To understand the risk, we have to look back at 2008. The stock market crashed by nearly 57%. It was a bloodbath. But if you held on, you were back to break-even by 2013. 5.5 years to recover from the worst financial disaster in a generation. Now look at housing. National prices dropped by 27%. On the surface, that looks better than the stock market. But because of leverage, that 27% drop didn't just take away your gains, it wiped out your entire life savings. If you put 20% down and the market drops 25%, you now owe the bank more than the house is worth. You are underwater. You cannot sell, you cannot move for a better job, and you are effectively a prisoner of your own zip code. In cities like Las Vegas or Miami, prices fell by 50%. People who bought there in 2006 didn't see a dime of equity until their children were in high school. That is 16 years of being trapped. Stocks don't do this to you. If your index fund drops 50%, you still own the shares. You can sell them in seconds. You are sad, but you are free. The asset doesn't own you. You own the asset. The conversation usually stops there, but we haven't even touched the most invisible part of the math, the friction. Real estate isn't just an asset. It's a liability that you happen to live inside of. When people tell you they bought a house for $200,000 and sold it for $500,000, they think they made $300,000. They didn't. They are running the math of a child. They are forgetting the property taxes, which average over 1% of the home's value every single year. In places like New Jersey or Texas, you are paying the government thousands of dollars a year just for the permission to stay in a house you already paid for. It is a subscription service to your own shelter. Then there is the insurance, which has skyrocketed by nearly 50% in the last few years because insurance companies have realized that climate change and fraud make housing a massive risk. Then there is the maintenance. The gold standard rule is that you will spend 1% of the home's value every year just to keep it from falling apart. If you own a $500,000 house, you are writing a $5,000 check every year for roofs, pipes, water heaters, and paint. Owning a home is essentially a series of expensive surprises that you have to pretend to be happy about. When you add up property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and the 5 to 6% commission you have to pay a realtor just to get out of the deal, the typical homeowner pays between 10 and 15% of the home's entire value in pure friction costs every few years. Real estate doesn't have an expense ratio. It has a lifestyle tax. By comparison, the stock market is almost free. You can buy an S&P 500 ETF for an expense ratio of 0.03%. That is $3 for every $10,000 invested. There are no leaking dishwashers in an index fund. There are no property tax hikes in a brokerage account. There are no phone calls at midnight because a pipe burst in your portfolio. The economist Robert Shiller, who won a Nobel Prize for studying these exact numbers, found that the average American completely hallucinates their home's return. Most people think their home is growing at 7 or 8% a year. The reality is closer to 0.4%. This isn't because people are bad at math. It's because the human brain is wired to remember the big numbers and forget the small ones. You remember the day you sold the house for a profit. You forget the $12,000 HVAC system you bought 5 years ago. You forget the $300 monthly tax bill. You forget the weekends spent at the hardware store. The sticker price of a house is a lie, because it doesn't account for the thousands of tiny paper cuts that bleed your net worth dry over 30 years. And yet, even with all these costs, even with the better returns in the stock market, the homeowner is still ending up richer. This is the most dangerous part of the math because it points to a flaw not in the assets, but in us. The reason the renter ends up poor and the homeowner ends up wealthy has almost nothing to do with the S&P 500 or the housing market. It has everything to do with the fact that you are the problem. The stock market is a perfect machine, but human beings are panic-driven animals. Research shows that the average investor underperforms the market by a massive margin because they check their accounts every day. When the market drops 10%, they get nervous. When it drops 20%, they panic. When it drops 30%, they sell everything and wait for things to feel safe again. By the time it feels safe, the recovery has already happened, and they've missed the gains. Real estate accidentally protects you from your own stupidity. You can't panic sell a house. You can't open an app on your phone at 2 a.m. and sell your kitchen. To sell a house, you have to hire a realtor, stage the furniture, wait 60 days for a buyer, and deal with a mountain of paperwork. That friction is the only reason you are wealthy. The house is a forced savings account. You pay the mortgage every month because if you don't, the sheriff shows up and puts your couch on the sidewalk. That fear is a more powerful financial advisor than any spreadsheet. For 30 years, you are forced to build equity. You are forced to save, you are forced to stay the course, and at the end of those 30 years, you wake up with an asset worth $500,000 simply because you weren't allowed to screw it up. The renter, meanwhile, had the opportunity to invest that same money into stocks and become a multi-millionaire. But they didn't. They spent the extra cash on a better car, a nicer vacation, or they pulled their money out of the market during the last correction. The house didn't win because it was a better investment. It won because it was a better cage. It kept you locked into a wealth-building habit that you wouldn't have had the discipline to maintain on your own. This is the behavioral truth that the math doesn't show. If you are the kind of person who can't keep $1,000 in a savings account without wanting to spend it, then the math doesn't matter. You need to buy a house. But if you have the discipline of an iron bar, the stock market will make you richer than any piece of real estate ever could. But there is a new factor in 2026 that changes the entire equation. The old guard of real estate gurus are still telling you to buy property because that's what worked for 30 years. But we are entering a period where the math is starting to break in a way we haven't seen in our lifetimes. The gap between the cost of owning and the cost of renting has hit an all-time high. In many major cities, it is now twice as expensive to pay a mortgage as it is to rent the exact same house next door. This is where the buy versus rent debate stops being a philosophical choice and starts being a mathematical emergency. If you are paying $4,000 a month for a mortgage on a house you could rent for $2,000, you are effectively burning $2,000 a month for the privilege of ownership. That is $24,000 a year that could be going into an index fund. Over 30 years, that compounded difference is enough to buy 5 houses in cash. We have to look at the tax code too, because this is the only place where the government actually helps the homeowner. If you sell your primary residence, you can take up to $500,000 in profit totally tax-free. The IRS doesn't get a dime. If you sell $500,000 worth of stocks, the government is going to show up and demand 15 to 20% of your gains. This tax-free growth is the single greatest gift the American government gives to the middle class. And for rental property owners, it gets even weirder. You can use something called a 1031 exchange to sell a property, buy a bigger one, and never pay taxes on the gain for your entire life. You can keep rolling those gains until you die, at which point your heirs get the property at a stepped-up basis, meaning all those decades of taxes simply vanish. It is the closest thing to a legal cheat code that exists in the financial world. But here is the catch. Most people watching this aren't real estate tycoons. They are just people trying to figure out where to put their next paycheck. And for the average person, the tax advantages of a 401k or a Roth IRA actually outweigh the benefits of a house. If your employer matches your 401k contribution, that is an instant 100% return on your money. No house in the world can give you a 100% return on day one. So who is actually winning this race? When you look at the top 1% of wealthy individuals, they don't have all their money in their primary residence. In fact, for the truly wealthy, their house is usually a tiny fraction of their net worth. The wealthy use real estate as a place to store wealth, but they use the stock market and business ownership to create it. The middle-class trap is believing that your house is your path to wealth. It isn't. Your house is a place to live that might, if you are lucky, help you stay ahead of inflation. Your real wealth is built in the things you own that don't require you to fix the plumbing. As we look toward the next decade, the question isn't whether stocks are better than real estate. The question is, which one are you actually going to stick with? The richest version of you isn't the one who found the perfect cap rate or the perfect entry point in the market. The richest version of you is the one who stayed in the game for 30 years without flinching. If you buy a house and sell it 5 years later, you lose. If you buy stocks and sell them 6 months later, you lose. The math only works if you have the stomach to let it work. In the next part of this breakdown, we are going to dive into the specific buy or rent calculator that the banks don't want you to use, and why the 5% rule is the only thing standing between you and a massive financial mistake. If you've ever felt like you were falling behind while everyone else was getting rich on property, you need to hear what comes next. The single biggest mistake people make when comparing a mortgage to rent is only looking at the monthly payment. You see a mortgage for $2,000 and a rent check for $2,000 and you assume they are the same. They aren't even in the same universe. Rent is the maximum you will ever pay for housing that month. A mortgage is the absolute minimum. When you rent, the landlord is the one who wakes up in a cold sweat when the roof starts leaking. When you own, that leak is a $5,000 deduction from your net worth that you have to pay for with after-tax dollars. To truly understand if you should buy a house, you have to apply the 5% rule. This is a mathematical framework that helps you compare the unrecoverable costs of home ownership to the cost of renting. About 1% of your home's value goes to property taxes, another 1% goes to maintenance, and roughly 3% is the cost of the capital itself, the interest you pay the bank or the profit you lose by not having that down payment in the stock market. Add that up, and you get 5%. If you live in a $500,000 house, your unrecoverable cost of owning is $25,000 a year, or about $2,000 a month. If you can rent that same house for less than $2,000, renting is mathematically superior. You are literally saving money by letting someone else own the building. This brings us to the great rental myth. We have been told that renting is throwing money away. This is one of the most successful marketing lies ever told. Renting is not throwing money away. It is buying a service. It is buying shelter, flexibility, and the total transfer of risk to someone else. When you buy a house, you are throwing away money on interest, taxes, and insurance, money you will never see again. The only difference is that the bank and the government are the ones collecting it instead of a landlord. In 2026, the gap between these two numbers is wider than it has been in 40 years. In cities like Austin, Nashville, and Phoenix, the cost of owning a home has outpaced local wages so dramatically that the math for rental properties has turned completely negative. If you buy a rental property today in most major U.S. markets, you are likely losing money every single month. You are paying for the privilege of being a landlord. The gurus tell you to buy for appreciation, but appreciation is not guaranteed. Cash flow is what keeps you alive, and right now, cash flow is on life support. Let's look at the hidden cost of the down payment. This is the part of the math that usually stays invisible. If you put $100,000 down on a house, that money is now dead. It is trapped in the walls. It isn't earning dividends. It isn't compounding in the S&P 500, and it isn't accessible if you lose your job. If the stock market returns an average of 10%, that $100,000 is costing you $10,000 a year in opportunity cost. Most people calculate their home's profit by subtracting the purchase price from the sale price. That is financial fiction. To get the real number, you have to subtract every property tax bill, every insurance premium, every repair, and the compounded interest you would have made if you had just bought an index fund instead. When you run the numbers that way, the profit on most homes vanishes instantly. In fact, most people who think they made money on their home actually lost money, compared to a simple, boring investment in the total stock market. But why, then, does the Federal Reserve say homeowners are so much wealthier? It's because of the forced discipline we talked about earlier, but it's also because of the way our society is structured to subsidize ownership. The government wants you to own a home because homeowners are easier to track, easier to tax, and less likely to cause social unrest. They give you the mortgage interest deduction. They give you the capital gains exclusion. They created a system where the bank takes all the risk of the money losing value through inflation, while you get all the upside of the asset increasing in value. If inflation stays at 4% and your mortgage is locked at 5%, you are effectively paying back the bank with cheaper dollars every year. Inflation is a homeowner's best friend and a renter's worst enemy. As the price of everything goes up, the renter's biggest expense, rent, goes up with it. But the homeowner's biggest expense, the mortgage, stays exactly the same. Over 30 years, that fixed cost becomes a massive advantage. While the renter is struggling with $5,000 monthly payments in the year 2050, the homeowner is still paying the same $2,000 they locked in decades ago. This is the inflation hedge argument, and it is the strongest reason to own a home, even if the math looks bad on day one. But you have to be careful. A hedge is only useful if you stay in the house. The average American moves every 7 years. Every time you move, the friction costs of real estate eat you alive. You pay 6% to sell, 3% to buy, and thousands of dollars in moving costs and new house furniture. If you move every 7 years, you are essentially resetting your wealth-building clock to zero over and over again. You are paying interest-heavy payments at the start of every new mortgage and never reaching the part where you actually own the house. This is the middle-class treadmill. You think you are building wealth because your house value is going up, but the transaction costs are draining your tank faster than you can fill it. The stock market, by contrast, has zero friction. You can move from New York to Tokyo, and your Vanguard account doesn't care. You don't have to stage your index funds. You don't have to pay a commission to a guy in a suit to sell your shares. This mobility is a massive wealth builder in a digital economy. If a better job opens up across the country that pays $20,000 more, the renter can take it immediately. The homeowner is stuck waiting for a buyer, worried about the local market, and paralyzed by the cost of the move. Sometimes, the best financial move you can make is the move that allows you to increase your income, and real estate is the biggest anchor holding your income in place. Now, let's talk about the mental tax. This is something no spreadsheet can capture. There is a psychological weight to owning a home that many people aren't prepared for. When you own, you are the CEO of a small infrastructure company. You are responsible for the waste management, the electrical grid, the plumbing, and the exterior security of a building. That mental bandwidth has a cost. If you are trying to build a side business, grow your career, or travel the world, a house is a massive distraction. Every hour you spend mowing the lawn or talking to a contractor is an hour you aren't spending on the things that actually drive your income. For many high performers, the freedom of renting is worth more than the tax breaks of owning. They would rather pay a premium to have a landlord handle the nonsense so they can focus on the activities that generate high returns. However, we have to look at the stock market trap too. While the stock market has lower fees and better returns, it requires a level of emotional stoicism that most humans simply don't possess. When the market is at an all-time high, everyone thinks they have a high-risk tolerance. Everyone thinks they are Warren Buffett. But when the headlines start screaming about a recession, when your portfolio is down 30%, and when your safe index fund looks like a sinking ship, most people flinch. They stop their automatic contributions. They move to cash. They wait for the dust to settle. And that is exactly when wealth is lost. The beauty of a house is that it is quiet wealth. You don't see a ticker symbol on your front door every morning telling you your house is worth 5% less than it was yesterday. You just live in it. You eat dinner in it. You sleep in it. That lack of daily feedback is a superpower. It prevents the panic that destroys stock market portfolios. So, if you are looking at the math today and feeling confused, it's because the math is telling two different stories. The wealth story says the stock market is the king of compounding. It is the most efficient, lowest cost, highest return vehicle ever created for the average person. But the behavioral story says that real estate is the only asset that forces you to act like a rational long-term investor. It uses your own fear of homelessness to make you rich. It uses the bank's money to amplify your gains, and it uses the government's tax code to protect your profits. The real question you have to ask yourself isn't, which asset is better? It is, which version of me is going to show up during a crisis? If you are the person who is going to panic sell your 401k when the market drops, then you are mathematically safer in a house, even with the taxes and the leaking roof. The house will protect you from yourself. But if you have the discipline to set an automatic buy order and never look at your account for 30 years, the stock market will provide a level of wealth and freedom that a primary residence can never match. In part 3, we are going to look at the third friend, the person who tries to do both and ends up with neither. We're going to break down the exact checklist you should use to decide if you are ready to buy in today's market, and the millionaire teacher secret that proves you don't need a six-figure income to beat both the stock market and the real estate market. We are going to find the middle ground that actually works for normal people who aren't financial geniuses. If you want the blueprint for the next 30 years of your life, stay with me. There is a third person in this story that we rarely talk about, and honestly, this is the person most people actually become. This isn't the guy who got rich in stocks or the woman who built a real estate empire. This is the fragmented investor. This is the person who starts a 401k at 25, gets nervous and stops contributing at 27, buys a house with a low down payment at 30, sells it at 34 to lock in a small gain, and then spends the next 5 years trying to time the next market crash. They have one foot in real estate and one foot in stocks, but they have no weight in either. They are constantly chasing the optimal move, but because they keep changing direction, they never benefit from the one thing that actually creates wealth: time. Compounding is like a plane taking off. The most dangerous part is the beginning, and if you keep taxiing back to the hangar to change your engine, you will never actually reach the clouds. The data is clear. It doesn't matter if you pick the stock market or the property market. What matters is that you pick a strategy you can actually survive for 3 decades. We often think the secret to wealth is intelligence, but if you look at the most successful investors in history, it's actually temperament. There is a famous study of over 10,000 American millionaires, and the results were shocking. The top 5 professions weren't hedge fund managers or Silicon Valley CEOs. They were engineers, accountants, teachers, managers, and attorneys. Think about that for a second. There are more millionaire teachers than there are millionaire lawyers. Why? Because teachers have a steady income, a long-term horizon, and, critically, they don't think they're smarter than the market. They don't try to time the bottom of a housing bubble or pick the next tech stock. They just keep feeding the machine, month after month, decade after decade. They understand that the boring math of automatic contributions is more powerful than any shocking math a guru can sell you. So here is the honest framework for 2026. If you are sitting on $80,000 and you're wondering where to put it, you need to run through this 3-step checklist. First, look at your price-to-rent ratio. If you live in a city like San Francisco, Seattle, or Los Angeles, where the cost of buying a home is 30 or 40 times the annual cost of renting it, you are almost certainly better off renting. In those markets, the 5% rule we talked about in Part 2 is screaming at you to stay away. You can rent a luxury apartment for $3,000 that would cost you $7,000 a month to own. In that scenario, you take the $4,000 difference and you put it into an index fund. You are getting the same quality of life while building a massive liquid portfolio that has no property taxes or maintenance fees. Second, look at your mobility horizon. If there is even a 20% chance that you will move in the next 5 years for a job, a relationship, or a lifestyle change, do not buy a house. The transaction costs alone, the 6% you pay to the realtor when you sell, will wipe out any appreciation you might have gained. You will walk away from the closing table with less money than you started with. Real estate is a game played in decades, not years. If you aren't ready to commit to a zip code for at least 7 to 10 years, you are better off keeping your wealth in the stock market where it stays liquid and portable. Third, look at your psychological floor. Be honest with yourself. If you saw your net worth drop by $200,000 in a single month because the stock market crashed, would you be able to sleep? Would you be able to leave that money alone? If the answer is no, then the inefficiency of real estate is actually a feature, not a bug. The fact that you can't see the price of your house changing every day, and the fact that it's hard to sell, is the only thing that will keep your wealth intact. For most people, the best financial decision isn't the one that makes the most money on a spreadsheet. It's the one that allows them to stay calm and stay invested. The ultimate strategy for the modern middle class isn't one or the other. It is a balanced, boring hybrid. Most self-made millionaires follow a very simple path. They buy a modest primary residence that costs no more than 2 or 3 times their annual income. This gives them a fixed housing cost and an inflation hedge. Then they take every other available dollar and they maximize their tax-advantaged accounts, the 401k match, the Roth IRA, and the health savings account. They don't buy investment properties that don't cash flow, and they don't buy speculative stocks. They own the roof over their head and they own a slice of the 500 largest companies in the world. That's it. That is the shocking math that actually works. It isn't flashy. It doesn't make for a great headline. And it won't get you a lot of likes on social media. But 30 years from now, it will make you a millionaire. The real enemy isn't the stock market or the real estate market. The real enemy is the middle-class trap. The belief that you need to be a genius to get ahead. You don't. You just need to be consistent. Your realtor wants you to believe the house is everything. Your broker wants you to believe the portfolio is everything. But your interest is to keep your wealth growing quietly and automatically while you live your life. Stop arguing about which asset is better, and start arguing with yourself about how much you can automate today. If you take one thing away from this breakdown, let it be this. The math of wealth is simple, but the behavior of wealth is hard. The stock market will compound your money faster, but real estate will compound your discipline harder. Choose the one that matches who you actually are, not who you wish you were. If you're a disciplined saver, go for the index funds and enjoy the freedom. If you're a natural spender who needs a forced savings account, buy the house and embrace the maintenance. Both paths lead to the same mountaintop, as long as you stop switching trails every time you see a shiny new rock. If you got value out of this breakdown, hit the like button so the algorithm knows this is the kind of math people actually need to see. Subscribe if you want more deep dives where we run the real numbers instead of selling you a dream. My name is Nick, and I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to show you the math so you can decide for yourself. This is your wealth, your future, and your life. Don't let a guru or a realtor make the decision for you. Run your own numbers, stay in the game, and let time do the heavy lifting. I'll see you in the next one.